So today we're going to unpack a really powerful blueprint for building genuine connection, especially in a world that feels so divided. All of this is based on an incredibly insightful interview article with Reverend Edwin Sue. Let's dive right in.
This question really gets to the heart of so many struggles we face. Whether it's in our communities, our workplaces, or even within our churches and faith groups, that feeling of real, lasting connection can be so hard to find. So what's the answer?
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at why we should even connect in the first place, what we're calling the divine call. Then we'll get into the how with a three-step blueprint. After that, we'll see it in action with a real story of synergy. And finally, we'll talk about the one thing that makes it all possible, the role of the unifying leader.
So, let's start with the why. Why is this connection so vital? Well, according to Reverend Sue's interview, this isn't about some corporate strategy or just being more efficient. No, he actually points us back to some powerful biblical images that show unity as nothing less than a divine mandate.
Okay, so the first big image he gives us is the church as the body of Christ. And it's such a powerful picture, right? Every single part is unique, it has its own function, but it's completely interconnected and absolutely essential to the whole. You can't have an eye doing the foot's job. They all have to work together, united under one head. And then you have the image of the vine and the branches. It's so simple, but so profound. It basically says our ability to produce anything of value, to bear any fruit, is completely dependent on staying connected to the source. If you sever that connection, everything just withers. It's that critical. And look, this idea isn't some new thing. If you go way back to the Old Testament, you see the 12 tribes of Israel. They were intentionally, physically organized around the tabernacle, which was the very symbol of God's presence. It created this God-centered, deeply connected nation right from the very beginning. Okay, so if this connection is a divine mandate, something so foundational, how in the world we actually do it? This is where we move from the why to the practical how. And Reverend Sue lays out this really clear three-part framework for building that kind of deep unity. And the process he lays out is super clear. It starts with alignment. From there, it moves to integration. And finally, that leads to mobilization. So let's break down what each of these really means. Let's dig into that first one, alignment. The Chinese word here, jiegui, literally means to link up tracks. And the metaphor Reverend Sue uses is perfect. It's like two trains that were on their own separate tracks, coming to a junction and then merging onto a single new track. It's this deep unification of vision and direction. But here's a really important catch. Alignment is not about everyone becoming a carbon copy of each other. It doesn't mean uniformity. Reverend Sue makes this brilliant distinction. When it comes to the essentials, the core theology, there must be unity. But when you get to the non-essentials, things like practical matters, there should be liberty. And in all things, especially cultural issues, there has to be charity. It's all about knowing where to stand firm and where to extend grace.
It all boils down to this classic saying, which is really the heart of the matter. It's a blueprint for connection that honors what's most important without forcing everyone to conform on the small stuff. It's about having the wisdom to know the difference.
All right, so theory is great, but does this stuff actually work in the real world? Let's look at an amazing real-world example of this whole framework in action.
So let's go back to the 1990s for a second. You've got these four distinct Christian organizations. Each one had its own lane, right? One focused on missions, another on research, a third on campus ministry for students, and the last one on training seminarians. Different focuses, but you can see how they might complement each other. So for 4 solid years, they decided to collaborate. They put on these intensive training camps for Chinese students and scholars in North America. And each year, a different organization would take the lead, building on the successes and the momentum of the year before. It was a real team effort. And the result? It was absolutely transformative. I mean, we're talking about a total shift in focus, from just simple outreach to deep, systematic discipleship. They created a whole new generation of leaders, and they achieved something together that, let's be honest, would have been completely impossible for any one of them to do on their own. That's synergy. It's such a cool story, right? But it makes you wonder, why did this work so well when so many other attempts at collaboration just fall apart? Reverend Sue's interview points to one final, absolutely critical piece of the puzzle: leadership. Well, Reverend Sue points to what he calls the secret sauce, 3 things that were absolutely essential. First, everyone had a kingdom-centered mindset. The shared mission was way more important than any single group's agenda. Second, the leaders were gentle and humble. They served, they didn't just command. And third, they had a clear, urgent, shared mission that everyone could get behind. And let's really zero in on that leadership part, because it's huge. The interview shines a spotlight on Reverend Thomas Wang. He wasn't some famous, charismatic figure. Instead, he was the glue that held the entire thing together. He truly embodied that servant leadership, uniting everyone by listening and showing humility, not by banging his fist on a table.
And his example really shows us this massive shift that's needed in leadership today. The old model, the one that relies on a single, top-down, authoritative figure, it's just not as effective anymore. The new model, the one we need for today's challenges, is a community of leaders all working together in genuine collaboration.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, times are changing. Reverend Sue observes that the era of these massive, personality-driven movements seems to be passing. The focus now is shifting towards something more grassroots, equipping disciples right there in their own local churches.
And that leaves us with this one final, really important question. The real takeaway from all this isn't just a three-step plan. It's a challenge. It's a question pointed right at us. Who are the unifying leaders our generation can raise up? Leaders who aren't defined by their fame, but by their humility and their deep, passionate commitment to collaboration. Because that, right there, is the true blueprint for connection.